Hello world, it's Manas again, back with the part 4 of the Python tutorial series. So in this part, we're going to get started with loops. But before we head on with what a loop is, let's first try to understand why a loop is. So if I ask you to print out numbers from 0 to 5, what would you do? Well, the first thing that comes to our mind is printing out, literally with the help of the print statement. So you would write print 0, print 1, print 2, print 3, print 4, print 5, and then just go ahead and change these numbers, right? Okay, and then if we go ahead and run this, you'll see that the output is 0 through 5. But this is a very primitive way of printing out numbers from 1 to 5. If I ask you to print out numbers from 1 to 100, would you write down 100 lines of code just to print out each number from 0 to 100? Well, absolutely yes. Well, you would write that if you didn't know what a for loop or what a loop is. But with the help of one very powerful technique called a loop, we'll be able to do absolutely amazing things. So let's first start by printing out numbers from 1 to 1000. So the syntax of a for loop, and there are two types of loop which we will discuss. The first is a for loop. This is the syntax. I'll just write it out. Okay, so what is this? What is this? So for, what exactly is a for loop? So a for loop has many components. One is this variable. This variable I is called the loop variable. This is the range for how long, basically from what value to what value should the loop execute. For how many times should the loop execute? This is the number of times the loop will run. How many times do you want the loop to run? And this, what we are printing out, is the loop variable itself, which keeps changing from 0 to 999, which we will see once we print it out. So as you can see, it is printed out numbers from 0. So that tells us, sorry, yeah, that tells us that I starts from 0. And if we scroll down all the way, we can see that I ends at 999. So it starts from 0 and ends at 999. Or in other words, it starts from 0. It starts from 0 and ends at the number of times you're supposed to execute minus 1. So what I mean by that is we wanted to execute the loop 1000 times. So it's the print statement or the value of I that we are printing out ranged from 0 till 999, which is just one less than 1000, right? But 0 to 999 tells us that the loop ran 1000 times, right? 0 all the way till 999. Okay, so this is great. You're thinking, wow, now we have a really efficient way of printing out numbers from 1 to 1000. You can make that 1 to 10,000, and you can see that it goes ahead and prints out all numbers from 1 to 10,000. But now we need to understand this function, this range. What exactly does this range do? What is the function of this range? Now, this range is an interesting function because it has a lot of parameters, which may seem the name might seem alien, but what it basically means is that the values that we pass inside these parentheses. Let me see if I can increase the size. Okay. So this is basically called the stop integer, or where should the loop stop. Now, as you can see, by default, the start integer, okay, it shows it over here, does it? 1 second. Yeah, okay. If we go into the documentation, we can see that it has a lot of parameters, range. It has, where is that? What are we looking for? Okay. Yeah, it has this, the stop integer, what we've provided. And just like the stop integer, there's also a start integer, which by default is 0. So if you see, we start at 0. Let me change this to 100. As you can see, we start from 0 and we end at this last value. So by default, this first value is 0. So we don't need to actually write 0 in there because it defaults to 0. But if you want to print out, let's say, numbers from 50 to 100, right? Then you would write 50 and it starts from 50 and it ends at what? 99, because it goes till 1 minus the last value, which is 99. Okay, this is great. This is really great. So now we have a way of printing out numbers from n to m, or from any value to any other value. But what if you wanted to print out numbers in the reverse order? What if you wanted to print out 100, 99, 98, stuff like that? So there's a way to do this, obviously. What you do is you initialize with your start value, which is 100. And then the final thing is the step. Now, what exactly is this step? Okay, this is what I was looking for. So the start integer, which we just discussed, the stop integer, which we also discussed, and now let's discuss this integer called the step. So the step integer is the difference between two consecutive i's. So what do I mean by that? So if I put a -1 over here, you will see that it goes ahead and prints out absolutely nothing. Oh, sorry, we'll put a 0 and then we'll put a -1. So what was the tiny mistake I made? This is a start integer. So we are starting at 100 and we are ending at 0. We're starting at 100, but we'll end at 1. Now in this case, because our step is -1, we won't actually go to -1. You might think that, oh, Manas is saying 0, but that means it should go to -1. But no, it'll be from 100 to 1. So basically 100 all the way till 1 will give us 100 iterations. Okay. Now, if you see this number, this is what is a very important part of the range function, which is the step or the increment size. Now, in this case, our increment is actually a decrement of -1. Each consecutive print statement, which is each consecutive value of I, has a difference of -1, right? So that's how we can print numbers from 100 to 1, or in any descending order. If I make this 50, you can see that we'll print out numbers from 100 till 51 in the reverse order. Right. Now let's try printing out all the even numbers, note even numbers, from 100 to 1000. So how will we do this? Well, we put our first start integer, which is 100. We put our last integer, which is 1000. And what do we put as a step? Well, the step size is going to be 2, right? Because we want to print out all even numbers. As you can see, this goes ahead and prints out all even numbers from 1 till, from 100 till 1000. All right then. So now let's try to really understand what does this for loop do at the back end. So this for loop is composed of actually 3 parts. Now what exactly are these 3 parts? The first part is the initialization part. So in the first part, we can see that the variable I is initialized, or the first value of I is set to the start integer, which is defaulted as 0, or we can pass it as an argument in this range function as any value that you like. So I've passed 100. So in that case, we are initializing it. We are initializing I to the start integer, right? That's the first part. Now the second part, and the most crucial part, is the test condition. And the test condition, what do I mean by this test condition? The test condition is basically an if statement. An if statement, which means I should be less than, and note, it should be less than the stop integer. This is the test condition. So if I starts as the start integer, which is 100, that means we should check at every iteration whether if I is less than the stop integer, and the stop integer is 1000. So that's what the second part of the for loop does. The third part, and I mean after this, obviously, if this condition is true, now there are 2 parts, right? If this condition is true, it will enter into this part, and we've already discussed indentation in previous videos. So if you've not checked that out and you're getting confused, so I'd recommend watching those. But if you know what indentation is, then you would know that this print statement is part of this for loop. this print statement is also part of this for loop, but this print statement is outside this for loop. Okay, so right. So coming back to the for loop and three parts, there are three parts. The first is the initialization, the second is the test condition if I is less than the stop integer, right? Now if 100 is less than 1000, yes, that's true. So we will enter this body, and the body is this indented part, which is these two print statements. So it will print out I, and in this case it will also print out I plus 1. Will it print out a high? Will it print out high? Okay, let's change it to hey to avoid confusion. Will it print out hey? It will not print out a hey because it's not part of the for loop. Okay, so what happens is it does this and then it checks this condition, and then if it's true, if I is less than the stop integer, it will print out these two lines. Okay, then the third part of the for loop is the increment or the decrement. Okay, now or in Python language you would call it the step. Now the step is what we also discussed, which is this last value that we can provide, and in our case it is 2. So at every time what this does, it basically says I is equal to I plus 2. Okay, so this is what this last part does. So it enters this for loop, it initializes the value of I to 100, it checks if the value of I is less than 1000. If it's true, it executes this, and then it comes back here and sees that the step size is 2. By default the step size is 1, so it will increment it by the step size. So if we put, let's say, a 2, it will add 2 to I and making I from 100 to 102. And if we make the step size as -2, it will make I 98 from 100. Okay, so I hope that was clear. Now, once we have done this increment or decrement, we again come back to the first part. But will the first part be again executed? No, this first part is only once. This part is executed only once. These two parts are executed at every iteration. So now when the value of I has become 102, we'll again check, is 102 less than 1000? And the answer is yes, this is true. So when this is true, it will again print out these values. Now as you can imagine, it will come to the value 998. Now is 998 less than 1000? Yes, it's true. So it will go ahead and print out 998. It will go ahead and print out 999. But now when it again increments, its value becomes 1000. So is 1000 less than the stop integer? No, it's not. And that's why it will not print out 1000. It will not print out 1001. So if we run this, you will see that it prints out all numbers 100, 101, 102, 103, because we've obviously put this extra print statement of I plus 1. So it'll print out all numbers from 100 to 1000, and then at the end there's going to be one hey, which is outside this for loop. So I hope we've dissected this for loop very well. So now that we've understood the basics of how a for loop works and what we can do with a for loop, let's try to solve a simple question, or let's try to program a little. So if the question is printing out all the multiples of 17 from 1 to 1000 and stopping when we reach the number 350. Okay, so how will we do this? So we will say for I in range. You can change this variable I to k or j, or I'll just put L this time. For L in range, we're going to start from 1, although that doesn't make sense because the first number is 17, right? So let's start from 1 to 350. 350, and the increment size should be 17, but let's keep it 1 itself. We don't need to put that, that's 1 by default, right? So now what do we check? We need a multiple of 17. So if L modulus 17 is 0, if the remainder when you divide L by 17 is 0, or in other words L is a multiple of 17, we will print out L. And just to make it a little bit more interesting, we'll also add an else if part. Elif L modulus 31 is equal to 0. So if the number is a multiple of 17 and the number is a multiple of 31, then we'll print them out. Okay, so we'll put that in as well. So now if I run this, you can see that all of these are either multiples of 17 or multiples of 31. So this was a short program to exercise our knowledge of for loops. And now that we've discussed for loops, in the next part, which is the part 5, we will be discussing the next type of loop, which is called the while loop. Hope to see you there. Bye bye.